Hi, everyone. Welcome to Both Sides of the Story. I'm your host, Alan Janae from CBS 4. Thanks for joining us. Our special high school debate fall tournament is nearing its end. Welcome to the third place match. On tonight's show, students from Denver East High School and George Washington High square off for third place in this fall's tournament. Both of the students tonight have prepared a pro and a con case for the debate. They won't know which side they're on until we have a coin flip right here in our studio. So let's meet our students right now. First up, we have Jess Miller. Jess Miller is a senior at East High School. She is co-captain of the East High debate team and qualified for the National Tournament of Champions debate competition last year. Jess was a member of the state champion constitutional law team, which placed sixth in the national competition in May of 2018. In her free time, she enjoys horseback riding. Next, Nick Gerrans from George Washington High School. Nick is a senior who has debated ever since he was in ninth grade. He has done both Lincoln Douglas and public forum debates. He also plays lacrosse. He wants to go to college on one of the coasts and study political science. Also joining us is our special panel of experts. They'll offer their analysis of our debate today. They are Dominic Dezzutti, host of Colorado Decides, the election debate series produced in conjunction with CBS 4. Next to him is Julia Baum from Holy Family High School's speech and debate team. Julia is a senior, and when she heads to college next year, she plans to major in political science as well as international relations. And next to her, Eric Sonderman, political analyst, seen right here on Colorado Inside Out on Friday nights. Okay, so let's set the ground rules right now. Each side will present their case, and then they'll have questions for each other and have a chance to offer rebuttals. When it's finished, we'll go to our illustrious panel for their questions and find out whom they felt offered the best arguments. So let's get started right now. The issue up for debate today is, should local governments in Colorado have the right to pass anti-camping bans to prevent homeless persons from congregating and living in certain areas? So we have our coin flip right now. We'll get things underway. Jess, I'm going to have you call it since you're on my right. Heads or tails?
Head.
I'm afraid it's tails. So, Nick, I'm going to allow you to choose. What side would you like?
I'll take the affirmative.
You take the affirmative. That means you go first. So, as a proponent during this round, the floor is now yours for 3 minutes. Nick, go ahead.
All right. I affirm the resolution which states resolved. Should local governments in Colorado have the right to pass anti-camping bans to prevent homeless persons from congregating and living in certain areas? Contention 1. Anti-camping bans benefit the homeless. Anti-camping bans are laws that prohibit camping outdoors in certain areas. These laws are designed to get homeless people off the streets and into the safety of shelters during nighttime. This is important because the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty writes in 2014 that homelessness carries risk of death and bodily injury from the natural elements, violence, and increased health risks caused or worsened by lack of shelter. Homelessness is an extreme danger that can cause severe harm and even death to people who choose to spend the night outdoors. Anti-camping bans solve this problem by disabling people from camping outdoors and encouraging them to use one of Denver's many aid programs for the homeless. Denver already has 9 homeless shelters, and there are new initiatives being started each year. CBS Denver writes in May 2018 that a new housing complex is opening up downtown to help the homeless as part of the Social Impact Bond Initiative. This new complex contains over 100 apartment units and will substantially increase the quality of life for the homeless. CBS Denver continues by stating that residents will receive individualized support through coalition case management. They'll get help obtaining health care, job training, and other tools necessary to transition from street to home. Not only has Denver just opened a new shelter, but also started the Dolores Project. The Denverite writes in August 2018 that the Dolores Project provides guaranteed weekly stays for people who need emergency shelters, plus case managers who help people find services. Denver has the resources to help the homeless, and anti-camping bans will encourage the homeless to utilize these resources. This provides our homeless population with protections from the dangers of the street and gives them the stability and job training required to move into a permanent house. The only way to break the cycle of homelessness is anti-camping bans, which cause the homeless to take advantage of the shelters that Denver provides. Contention 2, anti-camping bans don't criminalize the homeless. Even with all the access to shelters provided by our city, some people choose to remain on the streets. The Denver Post writes in 2017 that since the anti-camping ordinance passed, that there have been options for the homeless that some refuse to accept. Some homeless just don't want to access the benefits provided by shelters, but luckily, Denver doesn't use these bans to criminalize those people. The Denver Post continues to state that police have issued fewer than 30 tickets in 4.5 years under the camping bans. Westword also states in 2017 that the camping ban is enforced by police officers primarily through verbal move-on orders, rather than through issuing tickets or making arrests. The target of anti-camping bans is not individuals who refuse homeless shelters, but their namesake, encampments. Encampments are large groups of individuals gathered outdoor for an extended period of time. The Denver Post writes in 2017 that the experience in other cities proves that such encampments can quickly degenerate into a safety and health problem, a haven for crime and drug use. Encampments not only provide safe havens for criminal behavior, but also foster health risks for people living within them. The city of Tacoma writes in 2017 that encampments can contain bloodborne pathogens, biohazards, and even poisons. Anti-camping bans shut down the dangers of encampments and push people towards the safety and opportunity that shelters provide.
Nick, thank you very much. That's his 3 minutes for his main case. And now, Jess Miller, you have 2 minutes to ask Nick questions. Go right ahead.
Okay, so you bring up that we have enough shelters. Why don't people use these shelters in the status quo?
Well, you see, the people are using the shelters in the status quo. And the thing is, because people are using the shelters in the status quo, and the status quo is a status quo with anti-camping ordinance, we can see that these anti-camping ordinance really are being effective into pushing people towards these shelters. And with all the new initiatives, such as the Social Bond Initiative, such as the Dolores Project, and with the new shelters and opportunities opening each year, all these anti-camping bans do is make those shelters even a more attractive option for the homeless.
But are there still people on the streets right now?
Well, yes, there are still people on the street because, as I stated in my case, even with all the opportunity provided by shelters, some people just don't want to use those shelters. Luckily, the police in Denver don't target these people with anti-camping bans and simply tell them to move on. Look to my evidence that says that there's been 30 tickets issued in 4.5 years. That's practically nothing and shows that the people who choose to live on the street really don't get harmed in the process.
So what would be reasons that somebody would choose to live on the street?
I can't tell you an individual's reason. I'm sure it varies based on individual, and if you want to bring that up in your case, I'd be happy to hear it.
Okay, awesome. So what is the purpose of a ban? What is we working towards with an anti-camping ban?
The purpose of anti-camping bans is to shut down encampments. Encampments are the most dangerous part of, homelessness, and it's not even generated by the homeless individual. Simply, when you have a large collection of individuals camping out in a certain area, thus the name anti-camping bans, that is what fosters the crime and health problems that so many people say are associated with homelessness. So when you have these anti-camping bans in place, they're able to disable the most dangerous part of homelessness without targeting the individuals who suffer.
So do you think that we should be working towards in this debate how we can better end this cycle of homelessness so we have less people in these encampments and on the streets?
As I've stated in my case, the best way to end the cycle of homelessness is to encourage the homeless into shelters and other programs provided by Denver, which anti-camping bans do.
All right, the big question today, of course, is should local governments have the right to pass anti-camping bans? Jess Miller, the floor is now yours. Opposed to this idea, you have 3 minutes.
This debate is fundamentally about whether or not municipalities and local governments can govern public land in a way that criminalizes certain people. First, camping bans are not sustainable solutions. The ordinance does not permanently remove people from camp. People may be repeatedly ticketed with little to no effect. People who are experiencing homelessness just get jail time and come out and go back to camping. The resulting criminal records create barriers to accessing housing, employment, and services such as healthcare, furthering the cycle of poverty and homelessness. Additionally, the ban does not address the needs of the persistently mentally ill or chemically addicted who may be resistant to accept treatment or leave camps. This violates the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, as shelters frequently do not accommodate people with disabilities, and people are therefore forced to sleep outside and would be criminalized for doing so. Second, the right of the people to have a responsible and moral government outweighs the right of the government to police public spaces. Camping bans are not responsible because governments are not cost-effective or economical when they use them for the local populations. The ban resulted in a huge cost impact on the broader community. The 2010 Federal Strategic Plan to End Homelessness found that on average, cities spend $87 a day to jail a person, compared to only $28 a day for shelter. The Daily Camera Boulder reported that the average cost of prosecuting one camping ticket is about $1,100. The ban also does not address the shortage of shelter space, meaning people experiencing homelessness are being criminalized for living in the only option they have. With a fiduciary responsibility to taxpayers, it's irresponsible for local governments to waste resources on a costly camping ban when more effective, proven, and economical options are available. Third, states simply don't have the right to criminalize homelessness with a camping ban. First, because it violates the 8th Amendment, which guards against cruel and unusual punishment, including sleep deprivation. The U.S. Supreme Court in the 1960s established the status crimes doctrine, which provides that the 8th Amendment prohibits a subject who is person to criminal punishment based on his or her status. Advocates of those experiencing homelessness argue that the status crimes doctrine protects against the criminalization of conduct that people without homes have no choice to but to perform in public. Second, it violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, as the ordinance uses vague language that allows for arbitrary enforcement by law enforcement officials. It has been deemed discriminatory by selectively enforcing the law against those experiencing homelessness. The 14th Amendment limits what the government can criminalize, with courts explicitly stating that governments, quote, may not criminalize the state of being homeless in public places and may not criminalize the conduct that is an unavoidable consequence of being homeless. In fact, the Ninth Circuit Court in Belle v. City of Boise has already held that a city does not provide adequate shelter for the destitute cannot constitutionally enforce a law prohibiting them from sitting, lying, or sleeping in public places. Camping bans are unsustainable, are irresponsible government, and do not have a basis in case law. Thank you.
Jess, thank you very much. Jess speaking out against the idea that governments have the ability to pass camping bans. Now, Nick Gerens from George Washington High School, 2 minutes for questions to Jess. Go ahead.
All right, so the first half of your case, you're primarily talking about the criminalization of the homeless, specifically ticketing them, correct?
That's part of it, but I also talk about why people don't necessarily have choices in where they are going, especially people with disabilities.
So when you're talking about people with disabilities, if there's a certain project to accommodate their needs, wouldn't you agree that that satisfies the criterion that you lay out?
Unfortunately, what's going on right now is there's not enough of these shelters. First of all, many do not accommodate them, so they are pushed towards the street. And second of them, a lot of the ones that do accommodate them have religious affiliation. And so people are uncomfortable going to them. And also it would be against the First Amendment because the government would be, in essence, forcing people to go to a place with a religious obligation.
Could you read me your evidence telling me that there's not enough shelters in the status quo right now?
Yeah, so there's a University of Colorado study in 2018 that found that 73% of people experiencing homelessness have been turned away from shelters. And so there's simply not enough. And I understand that we're making more, but I don't think that 100 extra places, while that's a great step in the right direction, is necessarily enough to solve for the 73% of people who can't find shelter.
All right, so now going down to your case, you talk about these rights violations under the 8th Amendment, correct?
Yeah.
But do you know the standards that they actually have to achieve to violate those rights?
For the status crimes doctrine?
No, for the violating the 8th Amendment.
So that's how they violate the 8th Amendment, because the status crime doctrine is applied to the 8th Amendment, and what that says is that you can't criminalize people based on their status. So those 2 points go together.
All right. Yeah, I don't have any further questions.
Okay, Nick, thank you very much. Nick, you now have 2 minutes for a rebuttal statement, so go right ahead.
All right. So the fundamental crux of my opponent's case is she assumes that we are actually criminalizing the homeless. However, remember my entire second contention in which the police are doing the exact opposite. All of her impacts of this come off of homeless being repeatedly ticketed and arrested, given jail time. However, remember that there have only been 30 tickets issued in the past 4.5 years, and these are tickets targeting encampments, not homeless individuals. Encampments are the real problems that homelessness can generate, and when individuals are simply sleeping on the streets, the city of Denver does not punish them. My opponent paints you this narrative that every single homeless person in Denver is going to be punished simply for being homeless. I provide you 2 responses to this. First is that they have other options. My opponent tells you that shelters are full up, and that she reads you this University of Colorado study telling you that 73% of homeless don't have a home. However, this study isn't specific to Colorado. This study is a nationwide study talking about all the homeless in the entire United States of America. I have read the same study and it is not applicable to Colorado. What is applicable to Colorado is the Denver Post evidence that tells you that we are opening new facilities, that we are starting initiatives like the Dolores Project each and every year. Denver alone is providing solutions for the problem of homelessness, and all that anti-camping bans do are encourage the homeless to take advantage of these situations. She tells you that we don't address the needs of the mentally ill and that they are often turned away. That is exactly why the Dolores Project was created. The Dolores Project is a solution that specifically provides emergency shelters to transgender and mentally ill people in need of help. These people do have a solution in the status quo, and anti-camping bans are encouraging them to use these solutions. She tells you that tickets are very expensive and that costs $1,000 for each ticket that we give to them. However, remember that tickets are not being given. In the past 4.5 years, we have seen only less than 30 tickets given. This is less than $30,000 cost, a very insignificant amount that she tries to paint on a per ticket basis. Finally, she says that there is no rights being violated. The Department of Justice says it only violates the 8th Amendment if there is no shelter provided.
All right, Nick, thank you very much. We'll have to wrap it up there. Now, the question, of course, today is, should local governments have the right to pass camping bans to keep homeless people out of areas where, frankly, those cities don't want them? Jess, you now have the -3 minutes to respond and close. Go ahead.
So let's start off on Nick's first point. He talks about how they're going to benefit the homeless, but I simply don't think this is true. There are people on the streets right now in the status quo, and if he claims that there are enough shelters or that these shelters are good places where people can get treatment, I think that people would be going to the shelters. So I think there's probably a fundamental underlying problem that he's choosing to ignore, and I think that's probably that we don't have enough shelters, or second of all, that these shelters are really bad places that are probably overcrowded, and people would choose to be on the streets rather than being there. And so I think to take away that agency from people is really problematic, and I don't think it would actually benefit the homeless. But then second, he brings up that there's no criminalization, but I don't think we're seeing the full side of the story. Even if there's no criminalization, he's advocating for this move on policy by police, where police come and tell you to move on from your spot. But this is actually really problematic because 60% of homeless people reported that they get little sleep as they are frequently being quote unquote moved along. One interviewed person described his bad situation. He says, "I am of the working homeless class. I get regularly work through Standby, which is a temporary job service, but I don't make enough to afford my own place, so I sleep outside. But for 2 days in a row, I was too tired to go to work because the cop wouldn't leave me alone. Every time I got to a new spot, this cop would follow me and tell me, 'Move along. You can't stay here.' I was trying to sleep in alleyways and out of the way. I even went to a river, but he followed me there. I didn't get a ticket, but I didn't sleep either, and I lost 2 days' pay as a result." So this move on policy, while maybe not ticketing people, can still be really problematic because it's keeping them from getting a good night's rest, it's keeping them from improving their quality of life, and possibly getting a job that could get them out of homelessness. So for this reason, I'm not sure it necessarily matters if they're being criminalized, even though Nick brings up that 30 people already have been criminalized, which is not an insignificant amount. That's 30 people who now have this on this record and probably can't get jobs, and additionally, that's $30,000 in taxpayer money that could be spent on other positive projects like shelters. But then moving back over to my case, he tells you that we're not criminalizing the homeless, so we're not going to see any of the effects. But remember that people on the streets in the status quo are probably there because they can't find other shelter, or the shelter that they can find is so bad for them that they would rather sleep outside. Or they are being turned away because they are Americans with disabilities, and so this is really problematic. Additionally, I would like to bring up the fact that this question today is about the right of the states to pass anti-camping bans. And while he talks about the merits, I am the only one to bring up the actual rights of the states to pass these bans, which is where the 8th and 14th Amendment come in. So remember that we read the status crimes doctrine, which yes, is only applicable if there's not enough shelter, but I prove to you that there isn't enough shelter in Colorado because there are still people on the streets. And then second of all, I bring up this equal protection clause of the 14th Amendment because if you don't provide shelter, you cannot criminalize people for being homeless. Additionally, you're going to remember that this violates the Americans with Disabilities Act. He brings up that there's one project where Americans with disabilities can stay, but that's simply not enough for the many, many homeless people who have disabilities and are being discriminated against. So for these reasons, a camping ban is a very bad idea.
All right, Jess Miller from East High School, thank you very much. Now, Nick Ahrens from George Washington in the affirmative. Your 1 minute close. Nick, go ahead.
All right. My opponent flat out concedes that this is only a right violation if they are not provided shelter. However, she completely ignores the Denver Post evidence in my case, in which Colorado officials tell you that they are offering shelter and homeless people are refusing. Insofar as that is true, we can see the truth of why the homeless are still on the streets. It is not because Denver is not providing them shelters. We are providing 9 shelters already and creating new each year. It's that even with these shelters, even with these anti-camping bans, the homeless still refuse to go to the shelters. And there is nothing people can do about that. If homeless people choose to remain on the streets despite the criminalization and despite the shelter and opportunity available, there is no solution to that problem, and they will continue to stay on the streets. My opponent does not provide you any solvency for the root problem of homelessness, and I do. Remember what I tell you about shelters. Remember the healthcare access, the job training, and the opportunities provided when homeless people get access to these shelters, these new initiatives that are created each year. This is the only way we can actually help the homeless population for good, and all my opponent is proposing is continuing the cycle of homelessness and not giving them the shelters that they are fully capable of accessing.
Nick, thank you very much. Jess, thank you very much. An excellent debate. Let's go to our panel of experts right now, get their thoughts on what they saw. Dominic, there's a reason they're here.
Nick and Jess, I've been bragging about this series to people far and wide, and hopefully they have tuned in because of me bragging about it. And when they have tuned into this, they can see exactly why I've been bragging about it. So very well done. Great job. I'm going to let our esteemed panel here ask me the questions. Eric, let's start with you. Let's start with Nick about questions in his affirmative case.
Absolutely. I would just echo what Dominic said. He was asking me to be part of this morning again, and he didn't have to ask me. I was the one who really wanted to be here. It's a privilege. Nick, you make the case that by criminalizing homelessness through camping bans, that it's really okay because it's not enforced and very few people are issued tickets. Isn't there a disconnect there, or could you speak to the disconnect where if you're having a law on the books that isn't enforced, what is the point really of that law?
Yeah, of course. So as I stated at the bottom of my case, the main purpose of anti-camping bans is exactly to just stop their namesake, encampments. Because when you have these large gatherings of tents and these large congregations of people, that is when the real dangers and health risks stem. As I've stated, the reason that we have so few tickets is because they're not targeting the individuals. They're targeting the large groups, the large camps that actually generate the problems that people see when you talk about homelessness.
Julia, let's give you a shot to ask Nick a question.
All right, so because they are ticketing the encampments, how much do these tickets cost, and do you think those homeless encampments can afford that?
Well, as my opponent stated in the case, the tickets cost around $1,000, so I'd say that that is a substantial fee, especially if you're homeless. But the problem is, insofar as they're mainly ticketing the homeless who are engaging in crime, who are engaging in drug use in these encampments, I would argue that it's simply the justice system doling out the punishment to those crimes in a different way.
Nick, I'll offer a quick follow-up. If camping bans require there to be shelters for everybody to go to, should cities be forced to provide enough homeless shelters for a growing homeless population?
Oh, I think just outside of the resolution, like requiring homeless shelters to fit the homeless population should absolutely be done. Like even without anti-camping bans, it's still immoral to let our citizens sit on the street, which is why it's so amazing to live in a city like Denver, where we have so many problems, like the Social Impact Bond Initiative, the Dolores Project, and the new facilities opening up to actually solve these problems.
Jess, you're off the hook. Eric, question for Jess?
Sure. Jess, you speak very well about the rights of the homeless here. Can you talk a little bit about perhaps the other side of that equation, which is the rights of the public? If you're on the 16th Street Mall here in Denver as a business owner, or if you own a home near North Broadway where there are major homeless encampments, don't you have some rights as well in this equation?
I absolutely think we do have to consider the population as a whole, which is why I think if we were to do anti-camping bans, we would have to make it really clear, or not to do anti-camping bans, you can't camp on somebody else's property. And I do understand that it can be a problem on the 16th Street Mall, but I think a lot of times society really villainizes the homeless population, and I don't think a lot of times these people are doing a lot of crime or are doing these drugs. I think that might be a very small sect. I think a lot of the times they're really just trying to get by, and they're not really a disruption to the surrounding community.
Julia?
All right, so you brought up religious shelters. So do shelters with religious backgrounds force their beliefs upon the homeless? And if they do that, should they be banned?
Yeah, so I think this is not obviously all shelters, but there are some shelters that do require saying, for example, grace before a meal or require attendance of services if you want to stay there. And I think that they shouldn't necessarily ban, but at the same time, I don't think the government can take a stance where they're forcing people to go into a religious environment, because that would be against the anti-establishment section of our Constitution.
And just a quick follow-up. Is there, without an anti-camping ban, does the city have any way to not have their civic center turn into what it has in the past, like the Occupy Denver thing, where it's just a campground for months?
Absolutely. I think if we had better resources, better shelters, and more of them, people would want to go. I don't think anybody really wants to live on the street, but I think either the shelters are so bad or there's not enough of them that people have no other choice. So by improving shelters, we can encourage people to move into them.
Alan, we're going to need a minute to figure this one out.
I'm sure it is tough. And this is an issue that has remained for quite a while in the city of Denver and a lot of cities as they try to figure out what to do with the homeless population. The big question, of course, should local governments in Colorado have the right to impose camping bans on homeless people to try to keep them from congregating or living in certain areas? Our panel is going to take a moment to consider whom they felt won this debate. That gives me a moment to let you know that our championship match is coming up next week. Students from Cherry Creek High School and Mountain Vista High School will debate whether or not undocumented students should be allowed to receive in-state tuition to Colorado State schools. You'll not want to miss that one as well. All right, panel, do we have our decision? Go ahead.
Alan, we really could have used a lot more time on this one. Trying to think, who produces this thing? Can't we figure out a little more time for the panel? Nick and Jess, you both did a fantastic job. We probably could debate this finale for quite a while, but Jess, we decided to give you the decision today. We liked the way you stated the argumentation and set up the basics, but again, this was a very close debate. You both should be very proud of how you carried yourselves for this topic, and I'm just glad I get to brag about this show and saying I can just show this cop. This is why we do this series. Congratulations.
Fantastic. Jess Miller, congratulations. Nick Guerin, congratulations both for reaching this round and doing such a great job. Wonderful debate. You both ought to be very proud. So that's all the time that we have for our program tonight. I want to thank our excellent students for accepting our challenge and participating in our debate. I also want to thank our esteemed panel for sharing their thoughts. And finally, thank you for tuning in. It's the support of viewers like you and our sponsors that helps to make this show a reality. You can catch all of our great Both Sides debates on cpt12.org, so be sure and check them out. They're great. And you can catch me every morning on CBS 4 for all of the latest news and information about this year's elections and big issues. For everybody here at Colorado Public Television, I'm Alan Gionet. Thanks for watching, and that is Both Sides of the Story.